Hello. Now, in this lecture, we are going to be talking about the forms of the prophetic speech and literature. Okay? Now, before we get into this, I want to begin by telling you a story. Once upon a time, now let me pause right there and ask you to try to think through and fill in what you expect is going to be coming next in the story. If we sit down together, I say I'm going to tell you a story, and I begin once upon a time. What are you expecting to come next? Perhaps you're expecting for there to be a castle, like in this picture. Maybe a princess or someone is locked in a tower, or they're in danger. Maybe being guarded by a dragon or something. Someone is going to have to come to her rescue, right? Maybe a prince is going to come. He's going to have to overcome really impossible, obstacles to be able to rescue the princess. And then when is the story over? Well, at some point you're going to expect me to say, and they lived happily ever after. That is, the basic form, the structure of what we call a fairy tale or a folk tale. Form criticism is looking at these expected structures within a type of literature or even a type of speech. There's certain elements, and there's discourse markers, cues, specific phrases that you might be looking for. So when you say, "Oh, I'm going to tell a fairy tale," you might expect me to say "once upon a time." You would expect for certain things. Now, and very often these sorts of markers, these structures are almost intuitive for us when we are part of the culture that produces those particular forms. In the case of the fairy tales, folk tales, the reason why I begin there really is because of the influence of Hermann Gunkel and his approach to form criticism. In terms of the biblical text, he's the founder of form criticism. He's the one who really pioneered this approach, this method of study, and he was highly influenced by a couple brothers. I don't know much about them, but they traveled around the German countryside and gathering these folk tales, and you know them as the Brothers Grimm. And scholars, when they had collected these, it actually generated considerable scholarly interest, and people were noting that there were predictable forms, patterns to these types of tales and oral traditions. Hermann Gunkel was strongly influenced by this, and he took that basic approach to the biblical text and founded what we consider to be form criticism. Now, of course, let me just say right here, and I'll probably repeat this a few times, the form, the structure of a particular piece of writing or speech can certainly be modified. So, for instance, one of my favorite examples, especially thinking of, fairy tales in the form of a fairy tale, because it's such a familiar type of story. It's something we just know what to expect, what's coming next. Well, you think of the movie Shrek. Shrek took the fairy tale and then changed things that it ended up being really funny. Now it's no longer the prince who rescues the princess, but it's the ogre. Like, it's the last one you'd expect. And writers, anyone who is writing, certainly does not have to be bound to certain structures, but they can change, they can adapt things. Now, Hermann Gunkel, he and pioneering this approach to the biblical text, it wasn't just the prophetic literature, although that's what we're going to be looking at. It was form criticism of narrative, the patriarchal narratives, form criticism within the Psalms. It really encompassed all of the Old Testament. The basic approach of Gunkel in the prophetic works was first to isolate individual units of speech. So you open a book like Jeremiah, and you have these long poems. He said, let's break down to like a speech that would have been given on one particular occasion. That became the pericope, that became the text that he was examining. And then he would classify, analyze that speech according to the different forms. And then what he really was after was discovering what he termed the Sitzenleben. This is the life setting, the so-called original life setting for that particular speech. So it's not really the historical context, but it's the social context in which that text arose. So, as a couple of examples for this, the Sitzenleben of the patriarchal stories. This is according to Gunkel. Isn't the historical context of the second millennium, when the stories took place, during the second millennium, that's the years 1000 to 2000 BC or BCE. But rather, the Sitzenleben for the stories that we read is actually the tribes of Israel gathered around fires and telling the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all those. That's when the stories took shape. It might refer to a historical event, maybe not, according to Gunkel anyways. But the point is, when did the story take place? Here's another example, just off the top of my head. You hear a text, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. The Sitzenleben for that is not, out on a safari trying to catch tigers by their toes. It's the schoolyard. It's the playground of kids gathered together trying to figure out who's going to be it in the next game of tag. That's the Sitzenleben. For the prophets, the Sitzenleben is not the historical context of the 8th century, the 7th century, but rather it's the social context of the prophet standing in an open market, standing at the temple, standing before a king, giving the prophecy. When did that text originate? When was it first, spoken? That's the Sitzenleben. Okay, so he viewed form criticism as a means of getting to that setting, that social setting in life. Here is a quote, Hermann Gunkel, and this helps capture some of his approach. The prophets were not originally writers, but speakers. Anyone who thinks of ink and paper while reading their writings is in error from the outset. Here is the way they begin their works, not read. Above all, however, if contemporary readers wish to understand the prophets, they must entirely forget that the writings were collected in a sacred book centuries after the prophets wrote. The contemporary reader must not read their words as portions of the Bible, but must attempt to place them in the context of the life of the people of Israel in which they were first spoken. So maybe there's a lot going on in that paragraph. You might want to pause just for a moment and kind of process through what it is that he's saying, because there's kind of a lot there. You notice, this idea the prophets were not originally writers, but speakers. Okay, he's not interested in the overall literary structure of the final form of a biblical book, a book like Jeremiah. He's interested in what were the speeches given by Jeremiah himself. Okay, the original words of the prophet, Gunkel would say, were contained in these short, self-contained speech units. He said the words of the prophecy would have actually been quite short. So when you have a long poem that's, a really long poem, he would say, well, that's too long for someone to, stand in an open market and give that publicly. What he said must have been a very relatively short prophecy. And then these later on, these short speech units were then compiled into a larger collection, and then editors or redactors would come along and make additions and expansions to those original speech units, and he would judge those additions to be inferior additions. What he was after was the very short, what he would call original, speech unit. And you can imagine, for this reason, a lot of more conservative scholars have not embraced and engaged in form criticism, or at least that used to be the case. I don't think it is anymore, because they found it so dominated by this bias of always looking at the text, trying to strip away what they viewed as a late addition to the text to what is original to the text. Whereas a conservative scholar would say, well, it's all important. It's all part of the Bible. This is all relevant for us. So, and they would also tend to view the entire thing was original to, the prophet Jeremiah, or the prophet Isaiah, whoever it is. So there was some, some differences in approaches. Now, there certainly has been criticism of these early approaches to form criticism. Marvin Sweeney, who is, he's written some great books exploring form criticism. One that he has is a commentary on the book of Isaiah. The first volume, chapters 1 through 39, includes an introduction to form criticism. This is published by Erdman's. It's in the Forms of the Old Testament Literature series. It's a gray series. He includes a very helpful introduction to form criticism within the prophetic literature. And so if you have a chance to look at that, I strongly would encourage you. But he says this of early form critical research. He says, a great deal of early form critical research concentrated on stripping away the, quote, inferior work of later redactors and trade-ins by using genre as a criterion to identify and reconstruct the theologically significant, quote, original prophetic speeches. So what this means is that, you have a form that has a predictable structure. Take fairy tales. If you were reading a fairy tale that included, an unexpected element, something, all of a sudden there's a spaceship that comes along, someone would look at that and they would say, well, spaceships don't belong in fairy tales. That breaks the structure, that breaks the form. And so they would strip that away and they would say, that's not part of the original. That's a late addition. Okay? So early form critical research, what Sweeney here is telling us is that a lot of what they were doing was looking at, a speech and saying, well, what doesn't fit? And anything that they deemed did not fit was taken away, and they would label that a late inferior addition to the text. Okay? A more contemporary approach would say, let's not try to separate the text into late additions and, original and late additions. Give me 1 second here. Okay. Hopefully that pausing worked. So a more contemporary approach would not try to separate the text into, an original and late, part of the text, late additions, on the basis of genre. Rather, what it would say is allow the text in its final form, like the way that it just is given to us, that would shape our understanding of the genre, rather than the reverse. Rather than allowing our understanding of genre to shape the text, we allow the text to shape our understanding of genre. Okay, now that's a more contemporary approach to form criticism. Okay, now with that in mind, what we are actually going to be doing now is learning some of the basic forms of prophetic literature. Now, let me go ahead and warn you, this is a longer lecture. We're going to be covering a lot of the major forms. There's a handout that's made available to you on prophetic speech forms. I'm going to be pulling that up here on the video, and we're going to be working through these. So if you need to, by all means, watch one or two, take a break, and come back to the others. But here's, sort of the list of all the prophetic speech forms we're going to be learning. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of the types of prophetic speech that we encounter. This is just a sample list of some of the more common ones that you see. And this will help you not just in reading the book of Jeremiah, These speech forms are found across the prophetic literature, and you'll recognize some of these. So, without further ado, I'm going to pull up. Let's see. Let me see if I can fix this so it's not. I'm just going to try to resize this a bit. There we go. Okay. So prophetic speech forms. All right. So we're going to work through this document. You have it here. Prophetic books, just this opening here, are mostly collections of shorter, self-contained speeches. Now, Gunkel and his students would argue that those were very, very short. I don't think we have to go quite that long, but certainly we can appreciate that the book of Jeremiah is not 52 chapters of one giant prophetic speech. There's lots of multiple prophetic speeches that were delivered orally by the prophet. And usually this happened in a public setting. These original speeches were then collected and preserved, and what I think is probably the most helpful way to refer to them is an anthology of the prophetic oracle. It might not be everything Jeremiah ever prophesied. We have no reason to suspect that it is, but it's what has been, through the Holy Spirit, been preserved and contained within the biblical book of Jeremiah as we have it. These anthologies, eventually became these prophetic books as we now have. So here we have the different types of prophetic speech that we'll be going through. And the first one, very basic, is what's termed the prophetic judgment speech. Okay, this is just a very simple type of speech. It's a basic message of judgment or punishment from Yahweh. And this could be against a person, it could be against a group of people like the priests or the false prophets, or it could be against an entire nation. Okay? So basic message of judgment from Yahweh against a person, a group, or a nation. And the form, just like in a fairy tale, you expect a certain, structure to the way the fairy tale is written or told. And a prophetic judgment speech has a very basic form. You begin with the reason for punishment. What is the sin? What is the crime that has been committed? What is the covenant stipulation that has been transgressed? Why is the prophet announcing judgment? You go into the messenger speech formula. I'll talk about this in a different lecture, but messenger speech formula, this is an indication of speech from Yahweh. Usually it's, thus says the Lord, or some variation of that, declares the Lord, something like that. And then you have the announcement of punishment. Usually in English, it's the word lakain, or sometimes alkain, is translated therefore. And, combined with the messenger speech formula. So you might have, therefore, thus says the Lord, that kind of thing. And then the prophet is invoking the sanctions of the curses of the Mosaic covenant. So read Deuteronomy 28, and you'll have a whole list of blessings that are promised for the people if they obey God, and curses or punishments that are promised if they disobey God. And the prophet is identifying how the people have transgressed the covenant. They indicate that this speech is from God, not themselves, but it's this God's word to the people. And then the announcement, therefore, and then here's the punishment. Okay, so here's an example from the book of Jeremiah. So Jeremiah 23, verses 13 through 15, we read, "Moreover, among the prophets of Samaria, I saw an offensive thing." So this is the northern kingdom. So at the time of Jeremiah, these people they're long gone. Samaria has been destroyed and punished. And that's part of the history there. So he saw, among the prophets of Samaria, I saw an offensive thing. They prophesied by Baal and led my people Israel astray. Also among the prophets of Jerusalem I've seen a horrible thing, the committing of adultery and walking in deceit, and they strengthen the hands of evildoers, so that no one has turned back from his wickedness. All of them have become to me like Sodom, and her inhabitants like Gomorrah. So that is all part of the reason for punishment. He reminds them of Samaria. What happened to Samaria? Well, they were destroyed. Why were they destroyed? Well, they were prophesying by Baal. There was idolatry going on there and led the people of Israel astray. Now, even in Jerusalem, now we're down in the southern kingdom, he's also seen not just an offensive thing, now a horrible thing. Committing of adultery. Adultery is a standard metaphor within the prophets for idolatry. Committing of adultery, walking into streets, strengthen the hand of evildoers. No one's turned his back from wicked. Like, all the people are wicked. Here's the reason for punishment. And they're even just like Sodom and Gomorrah. And then we get verse 15. Therefore, there's that transition word. This is what the Lord of Armies says concerning the prophets. All right? So now we have Lord of Armies concerning the prophets. Messenger speech formula. This is what the Lord says. Therefore, and now the announcement of punishment. Behold, I am going to feed them wormwood and make them drink poisonous water. For from the prophets of Jerusalem, ungodliness has spread into all the land. All right, that's the basic form of a prophetic judgment speech. Now, again, I've already said this before, but when the prophets prophesied, they didn't have a school teacher looking over their shoulder, making sure that they stuck to the form. The form, when we talk about the form of a prophetic judgment speech, this is really just our attempt to appreciate the form, the structure of a prophetic judgment speech. It is not something they were bound to, that they had to keep and had to follow in a very precise way. So I'm sorry, I didn't scroll through. I'll try to be better about that with these other ones that we go through. All right. Now we have the prophetic announcement of salvation. And let me say, you will have opportunity to analyze your own prophetic speeches and be able to assess what you think is the speech form that is being used. Okay, so prophetic announcement of salvation. This is very simple. It's just a basic message of salvation or blessing from Yahweh, and it could be, again, to a person, to a group, or to a nation. Okay, basic message of salvation or blessing. It begins typically with the introductory formula. This might include a few different elements. It could include a reassurance formula, like a fear not, don't be afraid, take heart, be of good courage, have courage, something like that, reassuring someone. Also, the messenger formula, thus says the Lord, or some variation of that. So typically, when someone is being given an announcement of salvation, this is coming this is addressed to someone who is in trouble of some kind, like they're being threatened. They feel threatened. And this introductory statement serves to quell their fear and draw attention to Yahweh's message. So, as an example, just thinking out loud here, let me pull up just another example of this. The book of Isaiah, chapter 7. So in this context, the king Ahaz is surrounded by two other nations. They've come to make war against them. They've marched in on Jerusalem. Israel to the north, and Aram further north of them. And they've surrounded Ahaz in Jerusalem, and he is feeling afraid. And Isaiah comes, God sends Isaiah, and he says to him in verse 4, he gives this message of salvation. Take care and be calm. Have no fear, and do not be faint-hearted because of these two stumps of smoldering logs. That's how he refers to these two kings that have come and marched against him. You notice that reassurance. Take care. be calm, have no fear, and don't be faint-hearted. That is an introductory statement for a prophetic announcement of salvation. Then you will also have the second element here, a reference to the future. This announcement of salvation is, it's looking towards something that's coming. It's in contrast. Their present reality is dire. The present reality is they're scared. And now the announcement of salvation says, look ahead to something else, a vision of something different. And, sometimes this is not explicitly stated. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just, the blessing itself is given in the future tense. So just be aware of that. And then you have the blessing itself. The prophet announces this blessing or the salvation, the deliverance that they're wanting for. And it can take a variety of forms. It could be deliverance from enemies, as we saw in the case of Isaiah. It could come in the promise for increased land and the promise of children, God's provision for a king, all the different ways that God could bless the people. So here we have, this is kind of a fun example. This is from Jeremiah 28, verses 2 and 4. This is actually a false prophecy. This is not coming from Jeremiah. It's in the book of Jeremiah. This is coming from Hananiah, who was a false prophet who opposed Jeremiah. So Jeremiah had been prophesying, when the exiles had gone in 598, they'd gone into exile. Jeremiah said, this exile is not going to end anytime soon. Matter of fact, you need to go ahead and build houses there in Babylon, have children, have grandchildren, like plant a vineyard, pray for the city to prosper because you're not coming out of exile anytime soon. Hananiah and some other false prophets were saying the opposite. They said, oh, God's going to deliver us. He's already told me that he's going to defeat the Babylonians. Jeremiah is like, well, the Babylonians, God sent them as punishment. So very opposing views. But Hananiah makes this announcement of salvation. He says, this is what the Lord of armies, the God of Israel says. I have broken the yoke of the king of Babylon. This is an introductory statement, messenger formula. And he's saying, God is victorious. And then within 2 years, verse 3, within 2 years, I'm going to bring back to this place all the vessels of the Lord's house, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, took from this place and brought to Babylon. So reference to the future, within 2 years, he gives a time frame. It's just in a little bit, not too long from now. And then this prediction of salvation, he's bringing back all the vessels. And then verse 4, I'm also going to bring back to this place Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim. That's Jehoiakim. He is different name, same person though. Jeconiah, that king who had been in exile, living, as a royal guest in Nebuchadnezzar's house. Going to bring him back, king of Judah, and all the exiles of Judah. That would include, for instance, Ezekiel, who went to Babylon, declares the Lord, for I will break the yoke of the king of Babylon. So even though this is a false prophecy, it still follows the standard form of a prophetic announcement of salvation. Okay? So those are the two first. They're kind of basic standard: judgment speech and announcement of salvation. Now, we have the so-called covenant lawsuit. Okay? This is another type of judgment speech, but it's using, metaphorical language. The prophet is using legal imagery and terminology throughout this. The defendant is Israel, and Israel is being put on trial for breaking the covenant stipulations. So this is like ancient Israel law and order, I guess. Covenant lawsuit. The basic form of a covenant lawsuit, you begin with a summons, a calling to trial, often can include the technical term reeve. This is the lawsuit term. This is a technical term. And sometimes I wish it was translated like in a more consistent way in English Bibles, just because it helps people to recognize that this is what's happening here. But it's, a lawsuit or a dispute or a case. Sometimes it's translated contend, in Hosea chapter 2, contend with your mother, take her to court, sue her, God has a case against her. Oftentimes, the summoning can include calling witnesses to the trial. So, within a covenant, you have witnesses of a covenant. In ancient Near Eastern covenants, across the ancient Near East, normally the gods and goddesses were called on as witnesses. For Israel, you have God Himself sometimes is called as a witness. You have the people of Israel are sometimes called as witnesses. Joshua does this at the end of Joshua. You are witnesses at the end of the book of Joshua, where he calls the people, choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's a covenant renewal. Similarly, in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 26, it's not just God who's a witness, not just the people of Israel who are witnesses. But chapter 4, verse 26 of Deuteronomy, I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you today. And they're witnesses to the covenant. Now, when you say heaven and earth, that is a type of merism where you're talking all of creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is just saying God's calling creation itself as a witness of the covenant. So, you have the summoning to trial, and sometimes you'll see this calling of witnesses to hear. Listen, O heavens, hear, O earth, that kind of language. You have the accusation. What is it that the defendant, Israel, is being charged of? What have they done wrong? Evidence, so illustrations, evidence of how the defendant violated the stipulations of the covenant. So the accusation, the evidence, and then finally you have the verdict. The prophet announces Yahweh's verdict against the defendant. Often beginning, we saw this before with the word therefore, usually lakain, sometimes alkain, sometimes combined with the messenger speech formula. Okay? Now, here is an example. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but here we have, hear the word of the Lord, house of Jacob, and all the families of the house of Israel. This is the summoning to trial, okay? He's calling, house of Jacob, house of Israel, listen to this word. And then you have the accusation. This is what the Lord says. What injustice did your fathers find in me, and walked after emptiness and became empty? So that's what happened. They walked after vanity and became, themselves vanity. This is referring to idolatry. They walked after idols. This is in poetic language, so we have to appreciate that. Because they went after idols, and they became just like those idols. That's another story. That's another lecture for another day. And what's the evidence of that? They did not say, where is the Lord who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, who led us through the wilderness? And over to the next page, through a land of deserts and of pits, through a land of drought and of deep darkness, through a land that no one crossed and where no person lived. So they didn't call out to God. And he continues from there, gives more evidence. In verse 8 down here, the priests did not say, where is the Lord? And those who handled the law did not know me. So he's saying, the prophet's giving evidence. These people did not pursue God. Like how Josiah turned his heart towards the Lord, turned towards the Lord with everything. The people did not do that. Okay? And then we get down, verse 8. Rulers revolted against me. The prophets prophesied by Baal and walked after things that were of no benefit. He lays out the evidence for the people. And then verse 9. Therefore, I will still contend with you. That's that reb form. That's the lawsuit term. And God has a case against his people. I will contend with you, declares the Lord, and I will contend with your sons' sons. And then he goes into even more evidence. And really, this is all from chapter 2 here. Sorry. Chapter 2, verses 4 through 11. And it's really going through the majority of chapter 2 as a long, more complex covenant lawsuit with some other forms mixed in there. But that's kind of what's going on there, and you can kind of appreciate some of the structure there with that. Okay? I'm trying to pull these examples from the book of Jeremiah. Okay, the next one. Again, if this is a lot, feel free, take a break, come back and restart the video. So a woe oracle, okay? This one is usually pretty easy to identify because you have that term woe is often preserved within the English translation. This is a prophetic announcement, a punishment again, and it's used to criticize the actions or attitudes, and it could be of a person, a group, or a nation. It always uses the term hoi, which is translated woe, sometimes translated as alas, which is a funerary term. It's associated with funerals, used to express outrage, used to express condemnation. This is the type of thing that you would say if you were at the funeral of someone who'd been murdered. You would say, woe to the person who did this. Okay? The basic form, fairly simple. You have the woe statement, woe or alas, always at the beginning of a woe oracle. Jesus uses this in the New Testament. He says, woe to the Pharisees, woe to the hypocrites. That is, he's following this form of a woe oracle. So it can be used, I just said this, understood as a call for punishment against a murderer. When you express this at a victim's funeral. Then you have the persons condemned. Woe. Woe to whom? Well, woe to, they're named directly, woe to the priests or something like that. Sometimes you don't have them named directly as a noun statement, but more of like a participial phrase that characterizes their actions, like woe to the wicked, or even woe to those who rise early in the morning that they may pursue strong drink. Woe to the people who do this kind of thing. Woe to, people who are, evildoers. That kind of statement. So you have the woe statement, the person's condemned, and then, of course, the punishment. And as you should expect, usually begins with the word therefore. Woe to these people, who do this, and then the announcement of the punishment. So, Jeremiah 23, verses 1 and 2. Woe to the shepherds who are causing the sheep of my pasture to perish and are scattering them, declares the Lord. So you have the woe statement, and then who's being condemned? It's the shepherds who are causing, that's the participial statement. The shepherds who are causing the sheep of my pasture to perish and are scattering them, declares the Lord. And then you have the punishment. Therefore, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says concerning the shepherds who are tending my people. You have scattered my flock and driven them away and have not been concerned about them. Behold, I am going to call you to account for the evil of your deeds. So God's going to, he said, you're going to pay for what you've done, basically, declares the Lord. So that is a woe statement, or a woe oracle. All right. Now, moving right along, we have a funeral dirge. Okay, a dirge is a song of lament. This is a funeral song of lament. The prophet is imagining through this, speech, a personified nation or a king, almost as though they are a corpse, a dead body prepared for burial, and singing the lament. Let's see. Unlike, I think there's a typo there. The dirge is going to portray the fate of the deceased as inescapable. Like, this is a foregone conclusion, like they are as good as dead. Socially, in ancient Israel, normally a dirge or a lament would be performed by hired women or gifted individuals who would sing. They would be hired and brought in to sing this lament in the presence of the corpse. Okay? So you can kind of like imagine like you're at a wake or something like that, and these people are brought in to sing this lament. The basic form: you have a call or a summons. The prophet is usually addressing the audience with a command such as hear or listen to this lament. Sometimes they're invited to join in the lament, like join in the song. And sometimes the word hoy, alas or woe, is used. Sometimes you will find that form, but it looks quite different than the woe oracle. That's usually pretty easy to distinguish. You have the dirge itself, the actual song of lament. Usually is following, if you remember from the lecture on Hebrew poetry, it's following a particular metrical pattern, the kaina meter, the 3+2 stress accents. And it's directly mourning the loss of whoever has died. And sometimes it contrasts like how great they were with how they have fallen, like how they are in such a deplorable state now. And then oftentimes you can have a predictive element within this. A dirge can include a prediction of a coming disaster. Okay? So here we have Jeremiah 9, 17 through 19. So this is what the Lord of armies says. Consider and call for the mourning woman. This is the summoning of this that's happening here. Consider and call for the mourning woman, that they may come, and send for the skillful woman, that they may come. There's, the professional, the hired women called to come and sing this lament. Have them hurry and take up a wailing for us, so that our eyes may shed tears and our eyelids flow with water. For a voice of wailing is heard from Zion. And then you have the dirge itself with a prediction included with it. How devastated we are. We are put to great shame, for we have abandoned the land because they have torn down our homes. Okay? So they're how devastated, like, oh, alas, how devastated we are. We're put to great shame. And then, giving this, it's predictive, but giving it as just a foregone conclusion. We have abandoned the land. They've torn down our homes. Okay? So that is a prophetic lament. We're moving right on down. The vision report. This one's kind of fun. This is a vision report, is an autobiographical report from the prophet of what the prophet sees. So usually that's what we think of, the vision, or it could be what he hears, the audition, that's conveying Yahweh's message to the prophet for the people. Okay? There are three main types of a vision report. One is what's called an oracle vision. This includes a question and answer dialogue, and it conveys the meaning of a simple image. So the image of what's being seen here is not remarkable in itself. It's not something that you would think of as like, wow, you saw that. Like, it's a really simple thing. It becomes significant because of the meaning that God instills and puts in that image. The second one is called a dramatic word vision. This is dramatic. This is a depiction of something that if you said you saw this, you would say, wow, like I've never seen anything like that before. This is a depiction of a heavenly scene used to convey a word of Yahweh. And then the third type is the revelatory mystery vision. This is where you have, like, it's more like the book of Revelation. You have a divine guide who is conveying secrets of Yahweh's activity and future events. It's just on a whole different level. So we'll look at an oracle vision here, but dramatic word vision, think of Isaiah chapter 6. Like, that's like a perfect example. This depiction of, Isaiah's in the temple, and he sees the Lord high and exalted, the train of his robe filling the temple. The seraphim are flying around, covering themselves with their wings, and they're crying out, holy, holy, holy. That's not an ordinary thing to see. That is a dramatic word vision, and God gives his word through that experience. Revelatory mystery vision. You think of like Zechariah or even Daniel, as having this, divine guide, this angelic sort of figure who's, helping to interpret all these, bizarre and strange things that he's seeing. That's a revelatory mystery vision. But now here we have in Jeremiah chapter 1, we have these oracle visions. In verse 11, the word of the Lord came to me saying, "What do you see, Jeremiah?" And I said, "I see a branch of an almond tree." Now, right away you're saying, well, that's not anything very significant. I've got an almond tree out front. I see branches every day when I look out the window. Like, there's nothing special about that. It becomes significant because of the meaning that God inputs into that. He says, like, yes, you have seen well. Verse 12, the Lord said, "You have seen well, for I am watching over my word to perform it." Well, you might wonder what an almond branch has to do with watching over his word. We'll get to that when we look at chapter 1. There's a play on words that's happening in Hebrew. But just to appreciate the form, the structure. And then, again, verse 13, we have another one. "And the word of the Lord came to me a second time, saying, 'What do you see?' And I said, 'I see a boiling pot facing away from the north.'" So it sounds like it's a pot that was boiling, boiling water or stew or something, and it spilled over. And the direction that spilled is like, it was on the ground, on the coals of a fire, and it spilled facing away from the north. And the Lord said, verse 14, "Out of the north the evil will be unleashed on all the inhabitants of the land." So, in other words, an army is going to invade from the north. So there's nothing really significant. Like, you'll never guess what I saw. I saw a pot of water that spilled. You might say, well, wow, that's not really that special. It becomes significant because of the meaning that God instills in it. So this is a type of a vision report. Okay, let's see. And goes on from there. I think there's just one more. The disputation. Okay, disputation, or the prophetic dispute. Okay, a dispute is a type of argument. This is a speech form that is in the prophets. It's rooted in the wisdom tradition. Okay, coming from the wisdom. So wisdom tradition, you're thinking of books like Proverbs. You're thinking of Ecclesiastes. You're thinking of the book of Job. This is a form of prophetic speech employed by the prophets to persuade the audience to accept a certain truth or take a course of action. Accept something, like they're going to argue for something. It's not just announcing judgment, but it's making an argument for something. So examples in the prophetic literature are a little different. So like in the book of Job, you have some disputes going on. You have Job and his three friends going back and forth. And you say, okay, what does Bildad say? And what does Job say? And back and forth in those ways. In the prophets, you don't usually get both sides. You just get the prophet's side, but you can kind of tell that the disputation is still what's happening here. Okay? The basic form, you have the thesis. This is the position of the audience. Sometimes it's only inferred. You don't have it clearly stated explicitly. Or sometimes it's just given in the form of a question, like, why do you say this? Why do you say my way is hidden from the Lord? Isaiah chapter 40 has some great examples of this playing out. The book of Malachi has some great examples of this playing out. That's like just a series of prophetic disputes. Then you have the counter thesis. This is the position, against the thesis. This is what the prophet is arguing for. It's usually a lot more clearly stated than the thesis because this is the prophet's position. And then you have, sometimes an argument itself, argument proper, the disputation itself. The prophet might give examples or proofs to validate his claim. Don't look for it to look to appear as though it's an argument like you might have in a modern courtroom setting or something like that, or, like in a debate, it's going to look very different, but you can still appreciate it for what it is. Now we have Jeremiah 31, verses 29 through 30. In those days, they will no longer say, and here we actually get the quote, "The fathers have eaten sour grapes, but it is the children's teeth that have become blunt." Or some translations say the children's teeth have been set on edge. So first you have to parse out, what does that mean? This kind of proverbial saying, the fathers have eaten sour grapes, but the children's teeth have become blunt. In other words, the fathers did something, and the children are paying the price for it. Okay? And now Jeremiah is saying they will no longer say this. Right now the people say, like, the children are suffering for the sin of the fathers. And then in verse 30, but everyone, you will no longer say that, but everyone will die for his own wrongdoing. Each person who eats sour grapes, his own teeth will become blunt. So this is, in a way, this is arguing against, many people believe in this notion of generational curses, that God is cursing, a generation because of what the parents had done, the sins of the parents. And Jeremiah is saying, no, that's not how it's working. And you're no longer going to talk like that. If you're punished, you're going to be punished because of what you did, not because of what your parents did. Okay? So this is an example of a prophetic disputation. Let me just comment on that, just because I don't want there to be any confusion on the notion of generational curses. I think the Bible is, you can say clearly teaches that generational curses are not a biblical concept. However, I do think that you can easily say that, the sins of, parents certainly can have a negative influence and impact on their children. So if you have parents who are, alcoholic and, have, prone to violence and abuse and things like that, that certainly is going to affect the children. And very often children learn how to, they, will pick up good habits and bad habits from their parents. It's, as you know, that's a complicated topic and complicated idea. But in terms of, is God deliberately punishing the children because of what the parents did? I think the Bible clearly says, no, that is not how God operates. So this was a lot of material. We covered a whole lot, but I think understanding just these basic, relatively common prophetic speech forms will equip you to be able to read through the biblical text and have a lot more understanding of what's going on. Again, this is not just for the book of Jeremiah. This is across the prophetic books. They're all using these types of speech forms. So as you're working through the text, I hope that you will begin noticing these patterns more and more. All right, thank you.